Okay. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for spending a little bit of time with us here on this lovely Monday afternoon. We're now at day 534 of the year 2020 as we are trying to survive our way through the madness of what has been this pandemic. But we are almost there. We're through it. We can get through this. We are in this together. I've just had my second shot today, so just as a forewarning, if I start to space out or run away, we all know that's why, and I'm sure Rose will do a great job handling it through. But I am really pleased to have everybody here. So this is a really special tour for us, and I don't want to take too long in the introductions today because I was trying to figure out the best way to celebrate Poetry Month. And I thought it would be really nice to invite a handful of the guides to come and share some of their favorite poems with us. And sadly, due to the limits of time, I couldn't invite all of our guides. And hopefully we'll have other opportunities to include more because we certainly have a very large family. And if you've ever done any of our tours in the past, and been a guide on one of our tours, you know that you're family for me. And so today it's sort of like a celebration with some very good close friends of mine and family who have been with us for a variety of lengths of time. And I also thought it might be kind of nice because poetry as an art form has kind of become a little insular in some ways. Sometimes it feels like the poetry is written for poets and poetry scholars. And there was a time when it used to be much more open to us common folks. So I thought, what better way to remind us that poetry is for all than have a variety of drunken tour guides share some of their own favorite poems. Now, I think if the team could undo their cameras here, we've got 8 of us on here today. If you're in gallery view, you should be able to see all of us here. I'm not going to go through and introduce everyone right now. I'll do it right before their segments for the sake of time. But I did want to give a couple of quick shout outs. One is to Rose, who in my layout is right below me. Rose has been volunteering after she saw one of our virtual tours. She's never been on a physical tour. And she's been really helping out a lot in the background. She's been real instrumental to helping to elevate our tour. She's also running the PowerPoint today, which takes a big burden off of me. But she did just receive the updated script and PowerPoint a few minutes ago. So any mistakes are on my end, even if she does work with a PC, which I recently discovered, which is fine. We're okay with that. But great. Thank you to Rose. Also, 2 people who aren't with us today who have done a lot of help both during the tour and during the pandemic. Danielle Brockman. Some of you may remember her from some other virtual tours. She's done a lot with social media and marketing and just coming up with a lot of great ideas on how we can move the company forward. Her presence is missed today. She has a very demanding job, but we really appreciate, and I appreciate all the work that she's done. And of course, finally, there's Justin Steve. But in all honesty, as much as I love to give him a hard time in my intros, Justin's been helping me run this for years. And his presence, whether you know it or not, is felt everywhere. He's a great friend, and he's been a real great partner in a lot of this. And he's recently had a little bundle of joy, just smaller than this little bundle of joy here that Rob picked up. And so he's tired and he has his hands full. So we can certainly accept for the fact that he's not here. But that being said, I don't want to waste any more time with me talking. I'm going to do enough of that today. But I wanted to jump over to our first guide. But in advance of that, Rose, if you could bring up that first slide. Some people may not know, I have a book coming out soon. And I've been keeping it a little secret because I've been a little embarrassed about what fame and fortune might do for us here. So as we get through to slide 3, if you could. There we go. So my new book is called The World Gives Way. I'm really excited about this, but I'm concerned about fame and millions of dollars and getting recognized in the street. So I've been writing all of my works under a pseudonym. And that pseudonym, if you could click ahead, Rose, is Marissa Levine. And I felt like that was a really safe and comfortable pseudonym to write in. And strangely and coincidentally, our first guide who's sharing with us today is also named Marissa Levine. It's a very strange, bizarre world, but I hope you get a chance to read our book that is coming out shortly. But I am excited, and Marissa has been as a great guide, and this is her book. It is going to come out in the fall. You can pre-order it now. And it's getting some great reviews because some people have gotten advanced copies and have read it and have been raving about it, which does bring up the point that despite the fact that I brought Marissa in as a tour guide, and by being a tour guide, she met the man that she eventually married, and I performed the ceremony to legally wed them in the eyes of the Supreme Court, I have not received an advanced copy of this book. but that I'm not going to take it personally, but I think we might move on to our next guide. But in all seriousness, I can't wait to read your book. I'm excited. I've pre-ordered it. I want to give money to support, and I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fantastic. But Marissa, the poet you picked is one of these people, like, I've recognized the name, but I've never actually read anything by her. So why don't you give us a little bit?
First off, thank you for sharing your book with us. The cover looks amazing. I'm so excited for you. The book comes out June 15th, actually, and I will send you an advance copy since you've ribbed me just enough. I've got a spare few left. I'll send one to you. Because you did marry us after all. Anyways, that's not the point of anything. I'm here to talk about Elizabeth Bishop. Elizabeth Bishop is one of my absolute favorite poets. Just to give a little bit of background on her, she was in New York off and on for a good amount of her life. She never stayed very long. She was sort of here, there, and everywhere. She traveled a lot. Her story is one that has quite a bit of sadness to it, but I'm going to promise right up front, because this should be a happy occasion, that I'm going to promise you a happy ending to this story. So anyways, Elizabeth Bishop's first apartment, if we're just doing a good New York connection, her first apartment was number 16 Charles Street. Her buddy Mary McCarthy helped her find the spot. It was here that she wrote some of her first famous works of poetry, and where a lot of people consider her first finding her voice. One of the big ones that's considered her first famous work is called The Map, and it's a very New Yorky poem, and it is absolutely not the one that I'm going to share with you, but it's a good poem and you should look it up. So for Bishop, New York was really kind of a place of loss, unfortunately. She had a lot of tragedies happen when she lived here. While she was staying at the Chelsea Hotel, a former beau of hers actually killed himself shortly after she refused his marriage proposal. The man, Bob Seaver, apparently very much held a grudge. He sent a postcard to her that she received a few days later at the Chelsea that simply read, "Go to hell, Elizabeth." In later years, this was also the place where she was staying when, or not the Chelsea Hotel, but in New York, she was staying where one of the great loves of her life, not Bob Seaver, a woman named Lauda de Macedo Suarez, also killed herself while she was visiting Elizabeth Bishop in New York. Throughout her life, she had many forms of loss, and as she told her very good friend, the poet Robert Lowell, she said, "When you write my epitaph, you must say that I was the loneliest person who ever lived." And sorry. Sorry. Pardon me. So the poem that I am going to read for you. Sorry, my computer froze for a second and now I'm all flustered. The poem that I'm going to read for you, my personal favorite, Elizabeth Bishop's, is the poem One Art. And this is one that I think is her most famous. She wrote it shortly after nearly committing suicide herself near the end of her life, after the loss of another lover, a woman named Alice Methvessel. But here's the happy ending. Alice Methvessel had left her, but shortly after this, after a few months, she returned and they made up. And then Methvessel stayed with her until the end of her days, when Bishop died a very normal, very peaceful death. And my last sort of fun fact about Elizabeth Bishop is that she was, like I said, very good buddies with Mary McCarthy, and Mary McCarthy based a lesbian character in her novel The Group after Elizabeth Bishop, the character Eleanor Eastlake, or Lakey, which ended up basically ending her and Mary McCarthy's friendship, because as predicted, Elizabeth Bishop wasn't fond of being outed by Mary McCarthy in a giant landmark novel. But to give you a little bit of an idea of Elizabeth Bishop as a writer, this is One Art. I think it's her most famous poem. It's also just my absolute favorite. Here it is. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost, that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't hard, but it was not a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing isn't hard to master, though it may look like, write it, disaster.
Wow. Nice, beautiful, emotional. It's a deep one. What is it about that poem that speaks to you? I hope you don't feel like your life is a disaster. From the outside, it looks like it's going well.
No. For Bishop, it very much is a poem where she was cataloging the losses of her life. For me, it really just hits as this poem about moving through life and aging and sort of the way that you coalesce into your identity as an adult, which is really good and it's healthy, but also you end up sort of shedding all these things about yourself kind of as a snake skin to become the person that you are as you get older. And so it's really just this lovely poem for me that's a little sad, but also sort of in a bittersweet way. And above all, it's just very witty. Also, I'm a big poetry nerd, and this poem is what's called a villanelle, which has a very particular rhyme structure, and you're meant to repeat certain words and certain rhymes and certain lines over and over and over again. She says the word disaster over and over and over again in a certain way. And she gets cheeky near the end of it in a way that I really love. And she kind of goes meta about the style of villanelle, and she just parenthetically screams at herself, write the word one last time. And then she says disaster. And I love the idea of somebody being that, sad and full of change and full of life, but also just being very, very witty about it. I think it's pretty great.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing. That's great. And thank you to Marissa. So next up, before we get there, Rose told me that I needed a transition slide between our panelists, and I've learned quickly to listen to Rose. So I've created this with many different types of animation. If you have ever created PowerPoint, then you probably don't think much of it because it's not that hard. But if you've never created PowerPoint, be in awe, please. But I wanted to introduce our next guest, which is Derek Edwards. Derek and I met, we did some simultaneous tours for the Village Society when they were doing some tours of the some of the theaters in Greenwich Village. And afterwards, we kind of all powwowed together and had a drink. And I really kind of struck with how vibrant and passionate Derek was. And I was fortunate because the society reached out to the two of us and asked us if we were interested in collaborating on sort of a literary themed tour for last February's Black History Month. And so we came up with the Black Bohemian Tour, which I'm super proud of, and I hope he's super proud of, because it really came out quite well, I thought. And it was a lot of fun. And I don't know if Derek knows this or not, but being in a pandemic, Derek was my social life for about 9 weeks as we kept meeting every week to work on this. So Derek, you were one of my best friends during that time. And, I'm glad I could pull you back in to spend a little bit of time with you again, buddy. But he's a stand-up comic, and he's a real stand-up guy, very passionate about history and tourism. He does tours all over the city. He's a fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You might be able to spot it in the background on your Easter egg hunt. But Derek, we're thrilled to have you, and welcome.
Thank you. What a great introduction, and cheers to everybody out there. Put up the glass right now.
Cheers.
I decided to do Lorraine Hansberry, who we actually covered on the Black Bohemia Tour. And most of us are familiar with A Raisin in the Sun, but then I got to reading about her life as she moves to New York. She starts at New School after she had left Northwestern in Chicago. Also a connection. I'm born in suburban Chicago. She's a Chicagoan. And then it got interesting. After Raisin in the Sun, she actually lived at 112 Waverly Place, right near Washington Square Park. And she'll meet her future husband at NYU when they were arguing, actually protesting about segregated sports. First thing, I was like, I can understand segregation at NYU, but like sports? Wait, their team is the Violets. No. You can't play sports and you're the Violets. You sound more like an Easter Bunny parade. It's just not gonna work. So I thought that was entertaining, but it's interesting why at NYU she works, New School, she finds the Freedom newspaper, which Paul Robeson plays a big role into. And she financed her husband into a hit song, "Oh Candy Candy." Ah, there's Paul playing Othello, the great Renaissance man himself. And then later on, she finances her husband, and then he writes a Cindy, Cindy, it ain't old Jimmy Mac, but it's close enough. And then that financed her writing career. Unfortunately, her career was cut short, but this poem is something that I love to, it connects to my own family and some others, and goes by the name of Lynch Song. It had to do with a very interesting event that happened in 1946, well into 1951, that influenced a lot of things in American history. So here it goes. I can hear Rosalie, see the eyes of Willie Mcgee. My mother told me about lynchings. My mother told me about the dark nights and dirt roads, torchlights and lynch rows. The faces of men laughing white, faces of men dead in the night, sorrow night, and the sorrow night.
With so few words, and I know I'm trying to breathe that one out a little bit, and that was really nicely read, Derek. Can you get us a little bit of backstory? I guess a little bit on why you picked it, but for Willie Mcgee, because I know that's not something that we study a lot about in history. Can you give us a little backstory on the poem?
So Willie Mcgee gets as a black man, and he gets accused of rape of a white woman in 1946, November of 1946. She said he snuck in through the window and raped her next to her young kid, and her husband was in the other room. It all sounded a little suspicious. But a jury, when he finally went, they wouldn't even let him be out there. National Guard came and took him away. There were stories that they were going to come find him in the middle of the night and pull him out the jail and lynch him right there. So they had to hide him. When the actual trial happens, that's the good part. When the jury goes to deliberating, it took 3 minutes. You heard me, 3 minutes. So literally the minute ice man, and he had a few appeals. Every time it took less than 30 minutes for him to be convicted. Now, later on, his family said, and he didn't want to admit it, that they actually had a thing going on. The black people in the town actually believed it, and the whites, they said at that time, they didn't think that would happen with those social norms. But he becomes a cause célèbre, and Paul Robeson takes up his cause, as does William Faulkner, as does Albert Einstein. So you're starting to get like a whole slew of people. Up until that point, people have been accused of rape. Nobody had ever been executed for it. He gets executed 5 years later. So in 1951, interesting what I found, the two things, is that when Richard Nixon went overseas and was in Switzerland doing something on government business, his car that he was traveling in got stickered by the Europeans about free Willie Mcgee, don't execute him. And he came back saying the Southern strategy for using racism cannot survive. On a personal level, I found it very interesting because she's a Chicagoan writing about Mississippi. Some of my relatives are from Mississippi. And my great aunt, among many others, she always said something. She said, honey, I left Mississippi in 1955 and I ain't looked back. And then when I read like the way she says, my mom always told me, she would have been a very young girl at this time. She's near 80 now. But I was like, these are the stories that she was talking about when she always said, oh, I ain't looking back no more. I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. So I just found a personal connection. Last story I'll put, when his supporters gathered at the Lincoln Memorial just before he was executed, a soldier asked, why all this fuss over one life? And after he got done hearing all the stories, he kind of got it. Another visitor answered the young soldier, sometimes one life becomes a symbol of a million lives. And I think a lot of things we even see to this day, that holds very true.
Yeah, wow. That was really great, Derek. Thank you for sharing it. It was a lovely poem and some pretty vital backstory there. So Derek Edwards. So we used to do private tours for OkCupid, and these were fascinatingly unique tours. 40 to 50 people all signed up to see if they would find each other cute. Well, we tried to talk about literary and beer, and between the craziness of there, and I pretty quickly realized it was a little too awkward for me, and passed these over to Marissa to handle, for all sorts of obvious reasons. But on one of my last ones that I was there, this guy comes up to after the tour. He says, "Hey," which is a great way to start a conversation. And he followed it with, I really like the tour, which is a great segue, if you want to talk to me. And then he asked, "So how do I do this?" So I asked him about one of his favorite writers, and he went off on a diatribe about Jack Kerouac and the Beats. And I said, "You're hired." And the man, of course, is Devin here with us today, who is a big adventurer. And he's the type of guy that I would expect to find out that he parachuted out of a helicopter to ski down a volcano and then scuba dive to a coral reef to find buried treasure, because he always seems to be off somewhere. I'll be like, I'll text him about a tour and I won't hear back for a month. And he'll be like, "Sorry, man, I was in Thailand and recovering lost artifacts." But Devin, welcome. Great to have you here, sir. And what do you have for us today?
Thank you, Eric. That was a heck of an introduction. Always count on you for that. For the records, I was backwoods camping in the middle of Utah with my girlfriends, not in Thailand this time, but sorry for not texting you back. So today I want to talk about one of my favorite poets, poet Frank O'Hare, and specifically the poem, "The Day Lady Died." So this is a poem that O'Hare wrote as a eulogy for jazz singer Billie Holiday, who died July 17th, 1959 in New York. She's also the subject of a recent movie, People versus Billie Holiday. I think it's on Amazon. When he wrote this poem, he's working at the Museum of Modern Art at the time. And he used to tell people that he'd written the poem in one sitting on his lunch break. I didn't really believe that until I sort of started digging a little bit deeper. And I read a great review of O'Hare's work. And they said that other poets put words to paper carefully with an eyedropper. O'Hare blasts them with a fire hose. And I think this is sort of emblematic to his approach to poetry. He was hugely prolific. He wrote hundreds and hundreds of poems, but he was also very able to capture the detail and the emotion of a single scene in one of those poems. And "The Day Lady Died" goes like this. "It is 12:20 in New York, a Friday, 3 days after Bastille Day. Yes, it is 1959, and I go get a shoe shine because I will get off the 419 in East Hampton at 7:15 and then go straight to dinner, and I don't know the people who will feed me. I walk up the muggy street beginning to sun, and I have a hamburger and a malted, and I buy a ugly New World writing to see what the poets in Ghana are doing these days. I go on to the bank, and Miss Stillwagon, first name Linda I once heard, doesn't even look at my balance for once in her life. And in the Golden Griffin, I get a little Verlaine for Patsy with drawings by Bernard. Although I do think of Hesiod, Richmond Lattimore, or Brendan Behan's new play, or Les Balcons, or Les Negras, or Ganet, but I don't. I stick with Verlaine after practically going to sleep with Quanderinus. And for Mike, I just stroll into the Park Lane liquor store and I ask for a bottle of Strecca. And then I go back where I came from to 6th Avenue and to the tobacconist in the Ziegfeld Theater and casually ask for a carton of Gauloise and a carton of Piquillons and a New York Post with her face on it. And I'm sweating a lot by now, and I'm thinking of the 5 spot, leaning on the John Doerr in the 5 spot while she whispered a song along the keyboard to Mal Waldron, and everyone and I stopped breathing. And that is "The Day Lady Died" by Frank O'Hare.
That's great, and the style is such a it's such a reading poem because he's dropping so many names and cultural references and giving just a sense of how he's, I guess, navigating that day. But what is it for you about that poem that really kind of spoke to you? Would you say?
So for me, it's sort of these two things. So first, he really contrasts this hectic, frenetic rush that anyone who has been in a hurry to do something in New York feels. You have to get a shoe shine, you have to catch a train, you have to go, you have to eat, all these little things. And then it segues into that last segment with, he sort of moves away from the world of shoe shines and malteds and buying a book back into this world of a very profound memory. And I think to me, it's sort of the technical construction as well. There are I counted them, and there are 19 ands before that last line. And it creates this very fast-paced flow as you read. It sort of carries you through the poem, all the way until those 3 stressed syllables, where it goes into "I stopped breathing." And it sort of, to me, it forces you as the reader to slow down and to really take the air out of your reading voice, the same way he talks about the air being taken out of the room. And it sort of goes into that double meaning. Like, one, the air is taken away because of this beautiful, profound moment, but it also takes us back into realizing that at the end of the day, this is a eulogy for Billie Holiday, who had died. So it sort of has that double meaning, which I really love.
Oh, and you thought of all of this while you were backpacking in Utah?
So I did not, actually. When you texted me, I sort of panicked. I went through and I was actually texting my dad, who is a professor of beat English literature. And I was like, what do I do? And he sent me a few Kerouac poems, obviously, because I'm a huge Kerouac fan. And then I was like, no. And I thought back, I had seen O'Hare actually in an episode of Mad Men. And when he referenced O'Hare, I was like, that's it, boom, that's the one. Because that contrast, again, of that frenetic every day and the profound. And I was like, that's it. I remember reading it 3 or 4 times in a row, back to back. And I was like, this is the perfect poem.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Devin. So my wife has a subscription to Harper's Magazine, and periodically she'll slip me a folded up page, something like this, with something she think would be relevant for me, usually literary of interest. And I have these spread around the house in a completely random and disorganized way. But a week ago, I found one poem that kind of landed at, I guess, the right time or maybe the wrong time, because it's a bit of a ride. And it's a poet I have not heard of before, and now I am familiar with it and to share it. And it's the poet is Henry Dumas. So he was born in Arkansas, but at the age of 10, his family moved up to New York City, and he lived in Harlem. And this is right around 1944, which, as we can guess from before, and as what we might know from history, was a fairly difficult time to be Black in New York City, and a fairly difficult time for the Harlem neighborhood. But he schooled there. He went to high school there. He then went on to City College. He joined the Air Force and served in the military for a while. He went to Rutgers, became a professor at Southern Illinois University in their higher learning department. He eventually got married, and he wrote many poems and essays through the late 50s and 60s. And the one that is on this folded pieces of paper that my wife had given me, very powerful, and it's called The Firebird. The firebird has come again. Trees blow red where once green paddled the summer wing. The great oak, hugging my window, sheds and shakes with shivering fingers. Every year the firebird comes. It is not his beauty that I meditate, rather his awesome message. I burn them up now. Someday I will get you. I just love how quickly it becomes ominous. And again, so few words and so much power. He died young, at the age of 33. So most of his work was published posthumously. Initially, some of it was from his executor, Eugene B. Redman, who was the executor of his will. As his estate, he published Poetry for My People, Dumas's first collection to get published. And at the time, Toni Morrison was an editor at Random House and managed to influence them to publish several more of his collections. I said he died young. He died at the age of 33. He went through a subway station, 125th Street in Harlem, and was fatally shot and killed by a white police officer. There is very little information that we have about what happened. This was in 1968. According to the obituary, the claim was that he had a knife and he was threatening another person. And when the cop went to intervene, he got angry and allegedly slashed the cop, and the cop shot him. Most of the evidence to this case is gone. It's gone missing. So there's not a lot that we can do except take the word of the police officer, which is sadly, especially I'm sure these days, it feels like a difficult track record. It's also, I guess, important to notice that just a few years earlier, we had separate water fountains. We had separate entrances. 1965 was when Black women finally got the right to vote. So it was a very tumultuous time, and what at the time sort of felt like the peak of systemic racism, in the nation. Also, it's good to point out that this was the Serpico years. If you've ever seen the movie Serpico, this is when Frank Serpico was beginning to call attention to some widespread corruption and abuse that was going on in the police department, which led to him being shot in the face, not by a police officer, but they were doing a raid, and he had no friends on the force at that point. And so when he went in to do the bust, apparently no one else followed in. And so he was on his own and got shot. And Pacino had asked him later on, he said, why did you take such a big risk in such a department during that time? And he said, if I didn't, how could I listen to a piece of music? So here we are 53 years later, and I'm going to take us on a bit of a ride because I'm far from an expert when it comes to these kinds of major societal issues. I'm just some guy with a beer talking about poetry. And I'm not an expert on poetry. And I'm certainly not an expert on making beer. And I've tried to make beer, and it did not go particularly well, but I will be good at making beer someday. And I know that I will because my mother has saved all of my beer making supplies in 5-gallon jugs and tubes and cooking gear. And she believes in me. And she knows that someday, even though it's been 27 years since my last attempt, she knows that someday I will try again and I will offer her great beer. And it's great to have that appreciation. But here we are 53 years later. And I think I'm stereotyping a little bit when I say that I think anyone who would voluntarily attend a virtual tour about poetry probably thinks that we are way overdue for a bit of change. So for those of us who are a bit action oriented, beyond wearing a mask and going to a protest, one of the things that's come up is supporting some Black owned businesses. And so one of the ones that I've found is Black and Bold. It's they make coffee. They're based, I think, in Cleveland, and the proceeds go to support disadvantaged youth in that area. They do a mail order subscription package, so every month I get a couple from them, and that's been really nice. We also the All Stars Project is a company that I've done a lot of work for doing fundraising galas. They have branches in New York, New Jersey, Chicago, and other areas. And they've done a really good job of trying to offer internship positions, resume training, working on interview skills so that some of these children who can see a life outside of the project and see an opportunity that they would not have without something like the All Stars Project. So if you work with an organization that has interns, I would recommend reaching out because not only would you be getting interns, but you would be really helping to move people forward and give some kids who wouldn't have an opportunity a better chance at some life. But also with the pandemic, many of us kind of felt tensed up, so we wanted to share a good rousing meme on social media. Here's a couple more innocuous ones that I've shared. I totally relate to that bear on the left. But I have a real strong opinion about the efficacy of social media, but at least it is a means of getting the word out, and it does kind of feel like an action. But while all of these steps have value, they help with the byproduct. And again, the solutions to larger cultural issues are not for me to talk about because I am not an expert, but I am the foremost expert on me, which is ironically my least favorite subject. And I can be self-aware enough and honest enough to recognize that since racism is systemic and I have my whole life lived in the system, then the system lives in me. And I can take a little bit of comfort in that because I know that we are all products of our cultural surroundings and the vast myriad of influences, both direct and indirect. Especially as kids, we are sponges. We absorb from our surroundings. We didn't choose our accents, and almost all of us have some of them. I didn't certainly choose a Maine accent. I didn't sit there and think, the inability to pronounce such words as criteria, honesty, and drawer best encapsulate my inner spirit. My sense of humor comes from many different sources. It's an amalgamation of my father, who is a very funny man, a twisted sense of humor from Douglas Adams, and of course, Monty Python. This is one of my favorite Monty Python movies. So this twisted sense of humor comes from these outside cultural cues. I didn't choose them. Whether or not you call these soda pop or soda pop, or in the case of this particular New England brand, just plain disgusting, all depends on what area you kind of grew up in. It's based on your influences of your microsystem. So I can take some comfort in the fact that even though there is systemic bias in me, I didn't choose it. I didn't choose to mispronounce criteria, and I absorbed all of the good and the bad unawares. So let me tangent. If I'm the type of guy that gets really annoyed and angry at people who drive the speed limit. Now, I'm not talking about the highway. That is an entirely different topic altogether. The highway has 3 specific lanes. The right lane is for 65 miles per hour. The middle lane is for 75, and the left lane is for passing. And if you're in the left lane and there's a line of cars behind you and you're not passing, you need to fix yourself. But what I'm talking about is going 35 and a 35. And if you're getting sick of being called a grandmother, if you're driving the speed limit and driving like a square and not being cool, as the kids say 80 years ago, then subconsciously you're going to start driving closer and closer to the car in front of you. It's going to invigorate your drive. You're going to start consciously or subconsciously tailgating. much like these NYU Violets fans are doing before the big football game here in the parking lot. It is a rousing group of fans, as you can see. Now, in most cases, I'll be lucky enough and nothing will come of it. But in that one time that the car suddenly stops for a deer or a child, I'm going to default back into my training, no matter how well-intentioned I am about being a good driver. I'm going to hit the brakes, I'm going to try to spin the wheel, and I'm going to hit the car in front of me. Now, no one wants to hit the car in front of them. We all want to be like Obi-Wan. Little Obi-Wan driving. If I truly do not want to hit the car in front of me, then I need to check myself every time I'm behind the wheel for the rest of my driving career. If I don't, then I'm just hoping that nothing will happen, but I am willingly allowing it to happen again. I have to check myself. Am I too close? Am I going too fast? Why am I so annoyed with someone who's obeying the law? When a 6-year-old white girl takes a toy, does she get a reprimand? But when a 6-year-old black girl gets a toy, she gets detention. When an obnoxious white guy is walking down the sidewalk and forces me to walk out of the way, am I annoyed? But if it's a black man doing it, am I angry? Did women get the right to vote in 1918, or did women get the right to vote in 1965? Because it's these cultural biases that affect every aspect of it. And so I ask myself, and this is a legitimate question as I am trying to process my place in society. I ask myself the 2 a.m. knock test, because it comes from the fact that I'm a husband and I'm a father, and I have children and a wife that I want to protect. It's a systemic bias that I have. So if there's a knock on my door at 2 a.m., trying to see if there's help because there's an accident and they need my help, what is the criteria to get me to open the door right away? And what is the criteria to make me hesitate because I think it might be a trick? Is it one of these two guys on this next slide? These two guys, I think we can all agree, are not getting into my apartment. These two guys right here, I am going to hold on to my creepy clown bias. You're not getting in. But what is the criteria after that? And where does the spectrum of color fit into that part? So I have 2 amazing little girls, and they are some of the sweetest kids that I have met. Yesterday, we spent the whole day trying to walk through and pick up garbage because it's Earth Day. And my youngest daughter today on daycare was singing a song about how she loves the world and all the people, even all the strangers. And at some point, I'm going to have to teach them the criteria of how to judge a stranger, who's safe and who's not. And I hope that I can keep the systemic bias, this absorbed cultural bias from them, so that color is not a factor within that. Because someday they or their friends are going to be the officers, the soldiers, the business owners, the dog walkers, the joggers, the bird watchers, and tour guides. And what kind of biases do we want them to have? Because until we, of alabaster complexion, can face these uncomfortable truths and be very honest about our own self-reckoning and our own absorbed cultural biases, then it doesn't matter how much coffee we buy and protests we go to and posts we make and companies that we support. We're putting a Band-Aid on the byproduct to make ourselves feel better, and we're willingly allowing it to happen again. So I don't want to do that because I sincerely believe there's going to be a change. And so I am going to do the work because I live in a glass house and I have a lot of work to do. But I am going to do it because I know that the world needs people who are willing to be better people tomorrow than they are today. They need it desperately, people who are going to actively make that choice. So I'm going to look you in the camera and I'm going to tell you, I am not going to tailgate you. I'm going to pass in the passing lane and I'm going to do everything I can to make the system end with me. And that's what happens when I read poetry. I don't know about anyone else, but if you're wondering how you're going to dig yourself out of this particular hole that I put in there, then Miranda is the one to do it for us. Because when she told me who this next poet was that she was going to do, I was tickled pink. Because this is my childhood. This is absolutely who my parents read to me as a kid. And I have those same copies and I read them to my daughters. And it's even more fitting because if you were to take goodness and compassion and kindness and calmness and generosity and friendship and put it all in one person and then add to it a love of taking a heavy metal sword and swinging at another actor, you would have our next guide, Miranda, because that is how we met. She swung a heavy sword at me. I said, oh, you should be a guide with us. And she said, yeah, sure. But first, let me finish the stabby stabby with my shiny, shiny sword. So Miranda, my God, please, stabby stabby.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for the introduction and interesting coming into there. I'm happy to sort of do a different style for what we're having right now. So we're talking about, when I looked at poetry, I recently actually was thinking about Shel Silverstein. Now, part of that is because I've been reading through a bunch of children's books from my own childhood to read to my kid who is now 3 years old. And I remember when as a kid, like most of what I remember, his drawings, like those weird sort of sketches and how fun they were and how much like I just always was a little scared, but really loved them. Now as a parent, actually, I'm really interested in hearing his words and how strangely he understood kids and understood parenting in a way that like many children's books really don't get, in a way that's so fascinating to me. And so I'm going to actually talk about two different poems. The first one is one that really surprised me in its progressive teaching on how to parent, really. And it's called Don't Tell Me. Please don't tell me I should hug. Don't tell me I should care. Don't tell me just how grand I'd feel if I just learned to share. Don't say it's all right to cry. Be kind, be fair, be true. Just let me see you do it. Then I just might do it too. So he has amazing poems like that. And he's most, of course, known for his children's books, particularly The Giving Tree, which I admittedly am mixed on. And even if you read his stuff, he seems a little mixed on. And of course, his poetry, Where the Sidewalk Ends and A Light in the Attic. But actually, as an adult, I discovered his other major writing when I was working at the Museum of Sex. I was there cataloging old Playboys as my job for a while, which was a lot of fun. And I noticed a very similar drawing style when I opened one of them. So here you have Shel Silverstein with another man that he drove, as I have here. Now, Shel actually met Hugh Hefner because both of them were soldiers in the Korean War. And they both were drawing cartoons for the Army journal Pacific Stars and Stripes. He became a regular correspondent for Playboy, where he would draw and write comics based on travels that he did, including his own home here in Greenwich Village. You can see here a map of all the different places he had, including his own place. And one time he wrote actually for Playboy about Greenwich Village. And the way he describes him writing about it, it says, "A whole new philosophy called beat blossomed forth in America while he was away, and it took root in the village. On those pages, Shel Silverstein, this town within a town in all its beat and body glory." Now, Hugh told him when he was drawing these beautiful stories and cartoons that he also had to include pictures. This is Playboy. We require pictures. Along with his drawings in his travels. And one of my favorite pictures actually created a quote from a reader who highly enjoyed Shel's pictures. "I warn you that this picture and this quote may ruin some of your childhood. As a wife for 19 years with a 17-year-old son, I have been enjoying your magazine for some time. At last you have thought of us poor old housefrows and given us the symbol of manhood, and I might add virtue, in the person of Shel Silverstein. I could not sleep for thinking of that magnificent hunk of manhood. The exquisite beauty of his face and form, especially the rear view, has overwhelmed me. I feel tingly and giddy lightheadedness. Miss Lee Ackman, Brooklyn, New York, 1960.
I read these to my kids.
On that note, I'll actually end with one of the sweetest poems I've ever read. That was written by Shel Silverstein, called Hug of War. I will not play at tug of war. I'd rather play at hug of war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins, and everyone cuddles and everyone wins."
That's great. I love that. I love Shel. I'm going to leave it here. I didn't put up a transition slide for this one because I just wanted to leave it in this picture for a moment. But I want to get to our next one as we keep moving along here. Kurt Kingsley was not able to make it to us today. He will eventually be watching this later. And so I think it's kind of fun to be able to point out that at a certain point, Kurt will be watching this for the first time. So Kurt, you're watching this right now. You're watching you prepared right now. For those of you who are Mel Brooks fans. But Kurt did a poem that used to be one with us years and years ago back on the Minetta Tavern by E.E. Cummings. And it's called Nobody Loses All the Time. So I'm going to share the screen. It may get a little choppy for you right now. This was a recording we did the other day. And this is Kurt Kingsley.
Nobody loses all the time. Now, I had an uncle named Saul who was a born failure, and nearly everybody said he should have gone into vaudeville, maybe because Saul could sing McCann, he was a diver on Christmas Eve like hell itself, which may or may not account for the fact that my Uncle Saul indulged in that most possibly inexcusable of all, to use a highfalutin phrase, luxuries, that is, or to wit, farming. And be it needlessly added, my Uncle Saul's farm failed because the chickens ate the vegetables. So my Uncle Saul had a chicken farm till the skunks ate the chickens, when my Uncle Saul had a skunk farm. But the skunks caught cold and died. So my Uncle Saul imitated the skunks in a subtle manner, or by drowning himself in the water tank. But someone who had given my Uncle Saul a Victor Victrola and records while he lived, presented to him upon the auspicious occasion of his decease, a scrumptious, not to mention splendiferous funeral with tall boys and black gloves and flowers and everything. And I remember we all cried like the Missouri when my Uncle Saul's coffin lurched because somebody pressed a button, and down went my Uncle Saul and started a worm farm.
Kurt Kingsley, we miss you. We love you. You should have changed your schedule. No, sorry. But if we can move back on to Rose, if you can take control again, I will move back over to our next, which would be Christy, who is quite possibly the world's only knitting, goth, archival librarian, art historian, literary pub crawl guide. I feel like it's pretty fair to say that that's the case. She's been with us for ages now. 2009, I think, was the first tour. And her off-color sense of humor is but one of the many of traits that she has that I find adorable. Despite moving to Connecticut, which we don't hold against her, she does make regular trips back down so she can still guide with us. And her dedication and passion are ever appreciated. And again, you pulled out a name that I've never heard of. So let us know a little bit more, Christy.
Thank you. Wow, I don't know how to follow that up. Cool. So today I'm going to talk about the poet Mina Loy. Also, I apologize, the lighting in my apartment sucks, so at this point I might look like a glowing unearthly being. Just go with it. It's great. Okay. So Mina Loy was born in London, England in 1882. She was a poet, an artist, and a lampshade designer. In my background, you may notice this really lovely floral lamp thing going on. That's one of hers. And she wound up living in Paris, Florence, and New York City. So Loy was a modernist poet whose work both horrified people with this feminist, sexy themes and this unorthodox structure. So, for example, Love Songs to Ioannis was published in Others magazine, and another more, formal poet, Amy Lowell, was so disturbed by this publication that she refused to submit to Others ever again. Her loss, actually, I think our gain. But other more well-known authors like T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, and Gertrude Stein loved her work. Ezra Pound actually wrote this letter to Marianne Moore saying, "Is there anyone in America except you, Bill," by Bill we mean T.S. Eliot, "and Mina Loy, who can write anything of interest in verse?" Unfortunately, she's not very well known these days, as Eric just pointed out. Loy was a true bohemian, though. While in Paris, she frequented Gertrude Stein's salons. In Florence, Italy, she fell in with the Futurists, which is an artistic movement focused on explosively and violently breaking with past traditions. And she also wound up having a couple of affairs along the way with two of their major players, F.T. Marinetti, who wrote the original Futurist Manifesto, and Giovanni Papini, who was a journalist, critical theorist, and, Mina Loy's side piece. In New York and Paris, she associated with the Dada and Surrealist movements, hanging out with folks like Marcel Duchamp, Juna Barnes, and Alfred Stieglitz. We talk about Juna on the tour sometimes, so she's great. She was also an artist herself, actually. One of her works is pictured here, Christ on a Clothesline. And later on, during her second tour in New York, so to speak, she did a lot of like found like 3D art from garbage she found in the streets around the village. And she also did write and perform with the Provincetown Players. So Loy was married twice. The first time to artist Stephen Haweis, whose photos make up an important part of his corpus. You will see a couple of them. So like the one that's my favorite photo, and also another one that you'll see later were both by Haweis. It was the only good work of art he did. Okay, I'm biased. And the second time to boxer and poet Arthur Craven. Her second marriage, however, ended in tragedy when Craven went missing on a trip to South America. He was presumably lost at sea. There was an apocryphal story that he was later discovered in the middle of the Mexican desert, probably because she actually had a poem titled Mexican Desert. But as far as we know, that's not actually true. So this leads me into one of my favorite works by her, which was written around that time, and it's called Poe. A lyric elixir of death embalms the spindle spirits of your hourglass loves on moonspun nights. Sets icicle canopy for corpses of poesy with roses and northern lights. Where frozen nightingales and ilex idols sing burial rites.
Wow. That's a great poem, and that's a great one to pull out a dictionary and brush up on your. So what was it? What was it about this particular one that really connected with you?
So okay, so this poem for me is interesting from a topical and technical standpoint. For one, as I said, this was written around the time of Craven's disappearance / death. So the title and the imagery is very, very over the top. You see people in the graveyard covered with veils, and it directly seems to mock the melodramatics of our favorite OG of grief, Edgar Allan Poe. However, there was very real grief in these words and in her writing in general from that time. Like I said, Mexican desert, oh hell, so on and so forth. I find it really heartbreaking in how she doesn't quite want to be that level of emotionally vulnerable, that she writes this piece like subsumed with all that graveyard imagery, but she's still very, very rocked by sadness. This is where I say that the futurists sucked, and I blame the futurists for this because they hated feminine emotions and they all wound up becoming fascists, but that's another story. Okay, but what's more important, I think, because clearly I'm more important than anything, this poem was my introduction to good poetry. So the summer before I started high school, I used to troll the library down the street from me and, looking for things to read. And at that time, I was also writing a bunch, including some really awful poetry. So I found myself in that section one day and on a whim checked out an anthology of 20th century poetry. So, I'm flipping through and I'm in the table of contents and I saw this poet named Mina Loy listed. And I saw the title of this piece. So my proto-Gothic interests were piqued, and I loved it so much, and it got me on my first real kick reading modernist poetry, and it really made me the lit nerd I am today. It's also worth noting that I painstakingly wrote this out in calligraphy on some really nice paper and hung it up in my locker in high school. So if you're enjoying my virtual tour guiding, raise a glass to Mina.
That is such a perfect story for you, Christy. I could absolutely envision you doing that. Cheers for that. So now we're going to move over to our last guest host, which would be our friend Rob in the hat and plaid. Now, Rob, I met, he directed me in a 7-minute piece for a theater company, Amios Theater Company. And we just hit it off greatly. And he's a musician. He's a bit of a poet. He's a tour guide, and he goes by Professor Mortimer on an alternative tour that can be done every so often. And he's just a real great guy and really passionate about tours and history and certainly what we do. And I'm really thrilled that he could take the time despite having his kids going to bed right now. Rob, thank you. And I know you picked someone that has some heart for me.
Well, yeah, and for me as well. And I never would have found out about her if not for Literary Pub Crawl. Y'all introduced me to this wonderful poet, and those kids are not quite going to bed yet. So if you hear some bursts of exuberation behind me, I have 2 daughters, and they're amazing, and they're very, very loud. So I'm going to be speaking about the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. So Vincent was born and raised in a small town in Maine. She didn't head off to college right after secondary school, but at the age of 20, she submitted her poem, was entitled Renaissance, to a magazine's poetry contest, and she won fourth place. This magazine was called The Lyric Year. And when people read the winning submissions, everyone, including the first place winner, a poet by the name of Ulrich Johns, they all agreed that actually Edna's was the best poem. The resulting controversy brought her some little bit of acclaim. Shortly thereafter, a wealthy arts patron happens to hear Edna reading poetry and playing the piano up in Maine, and she offers to pay for her full tuition to Vassar. Just like, you got to go get an education, girl. So she sends her to Vassar. After Vassar, Vincent moved to Greenwich Village, and that's where she starts writing. She continues writing poetry. She writes some plays. She starts acting with the Provincetown Players, whom you've heard mentioned earlier in this tour. And basically, she's living the bohemian dream in Greenwich Village, right? She and her sister Norma are living together in what they called the Hell Hole at 139 Waverly Place. It's hard for me to imagine in anything in Waverly Place being called a hellhole, no matter how bad it is. You're on Waverly Place. It's amazing. It was here, though, that these two charming young ladies from small town Maine practiced the fine art of profanity. They would sit darning socks, and they would work to get the choicest of four-letter words to roll trippingly off their tongues. So imagine it as such. Needle in, shit. Needle out, piss. Needle in, fuck. Needle out, last word redacted. I'm not going to say that one. Vincent would refer to this time as she was getting her footing in the village as, she would call it, quote, very, very poor and very, very merry. Love that. So you might have noticed earlier I referred to her as Vincent. That's because that's how she preferred to be addressed. She was openly bisexual and today might consider herself genderqueer. She was married, but she took lovers of both genders, and her husband was actually totally cool with it. They had an open marriage. She got a lot of inspiration from her romantic affairs. A lot of her work is actually predicated on those sorts of affairs, but not the poem I'm about to read. It is presumably inspired by the garden that used to be behind that apartment on Waverly, and it's entitled The Little Ghost, and I'm going to recite it after I stop the music that's playing.
I think that was supposed to play during the Shel Silverstein bit.
It's closer to where it belongs, right?
Yeah.
It's a sound that has not gone off in this house for literally 2 months, and of course, the moment I'm trying to read, I love. My kids are amazing. They know what's going on. This poem again is called The Little Ghost. I knew her for a little ghost that in my garden walked. The wall is high, higher than most, and the green gate was locked. And yet I did not think of that till after she was gone. I knew her by the broad white hat, all ruffled she had on. By the dear ruffles round her feet, by her small hands that hung in their lace mitts, austere and sweet, her gown's white folds among. I watched to see if she would stay, what she would do, and oh, she looked as if she liked the way I let my garden grow. She bent above my favorite mints with conscious garden grace. She smiled and smiled. There was no hint of sadness in her face. She held her gown on either side to let her slippers show, and up the walk she went with pride, the way great ladies go. And where the wall is built in new and is of ivy bare, she paused, then opened and passed through a gate that once was there.
Nice. I love it. I love Maine. I mean, I love Millay. I'm from Rockland, Maine, where she was born. So obviously there's a little connection.
The reason I really picked it, Eric, was to, kind of appeal to you, getting good with the boss.
Yeah, I always keep her poetry in my drawer because it means a lot. So, but why? I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyways. Why The Little Ghost, Rob?
I told you to get in good with the boss. I had to pick Millay. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, it's for the ghosts.
Yeah.
And that's only partially true. It's not just for the spook factor. That's awesome. I love ghosts. I love ghost stories, as Eric mentioned earlier. But really, I'm into ghost stories because they're history stories. You can't have a ghost without history. And ghost stories reveal a lot, I think, about like who we are, like what stories we choose to tell and how that history stays with us. It haunts us, if you will. So I love the village. I love hanging out there. But if you went there today, like just think about it. If you didn't know the history, would you naturally understand what was there and what was so important about it? At first glance, you might just kind of miss it. That's why things like what we do with the pub crawl are really great, because like many places, especially in a city, streets, places, these things are palimpsests. And yeah, I went to grad school, so apologies if I'm using a word you haven't heard, but a palimpsest is basically where you have something written down and then you erase it and then you write over it and then you erase it and you write over it. You keep doing that. And basically with a space, the past is erased and then written over again and again as we redevelop, as we change things. Ghost stories are my personal favorite way for the past to shine through to the present. And I like to think that's part of what Vincent was saying with this poem, because it's not just this space at 139 Waverly Place where she lived. It's also about a person, right? We're constantly changing ourselves. We're always ourselves a palimpsest. So the little ghost could be the speaker's past, speaking to the present, approving of how the poet has led her life and the history that she's currently writing for herself in the present.
Nice. Well, and thank you, Rob, and to your guest presenters that joined you today. I think we got taste.
The laughter that accompanied. Those are my little ghosts, basically.
You're a little ghost. That's right. And I think it's another just shout out to just what we've had to do to survive through the pandemic right now. As for many of us, that was, I know I went through that hair pulling for a while. Like, oh my gosh. I'm used to working at home, but suddenly there's 3 other people in my office all day long. I'm like, what are you doing? Well, thank you, Rob, for sharing that poem. So we are at the hour, which was going to happen inevitably, I believe. For those of you who can spare a few minutes, I did want to share one other poet. And so I am going to, if you want to skip ahead, Rose, to the surprise and stay on that surprise. The last poet, I'm going to jump right into the poem because I've really wanted to do this for a while. And the poem goes like this. I'd rather stimulate you with my mind. Some say I'm well informed and widely read, but to my witticisms you are blind. Perhaps it's pulchritude that turns your head. Disregarding all my aspirations, I diet to a fraction of myself. Famished for regard and admiration, I've banished pride and breeding to a shelf. While I've turned from scholarly ambitions and cultivated fashion to an art, this I ponder as a mathematician. I muse its beauty that may jolt your heart. My wisdom has been trumped by vanity, so I try beauty. That may be the key. And I really kind of love that poem and the struggles to woo another, as well as more rich vocabulary. The poem is entitled, I Try Beauty. It's from the 3rd collection that is called Today I Found This Rose, and the poet is Cedric L. Jones. I think a lot of people are smiling here. I don't know a lot about Cedric Jones's early life, but I know that in the early aughts, he was an aspiring actor and did a lot of off-Broadway shows in the city, working as a waiter and managing a restaurant. And then eventually, as you see here, he started singing cabaret, and he created his character, Mr. Diva. Now, for those of you who might be having as the first foray into his poetry, I do suggest the Today I Found This Rose collection. It's his latest one, and I think he really hit his stride in it. It's also very well reviewed. So that in itself should be enough. And I think I might be a little bold to say this, but I kind of feel like Cedric's mother and I might have one thing in common. And that would be that she and I both own all 3 collections of Cedric Jones's poetries. Now, the other great thing that we love about him is whenever we can find a literary figure who has drank at one of our bars, we always get excited. And he, of course, we can now put at every single bar we've ever gone to, because as you can see, Cedric was once a guide for us. And yes, I may have a little bit of bias here. And if you can advance to the next slide, you will see a classic Cedric shot. He was indeed one of our tour guides for a while. And he's a great actor. In fact, I directed he and Marissa in a piece. It's one of my favorite pieces I've ever directed.
He's my best stage husband ever.
But I do have one story, because we all have some stories we're telling. And I want to tell one story of Cedric. So he was doing an off Broadway play with a group of other actors. And the premise was there were two young actors on an upper level, and they were describing, hey, let's tell this play, let's tell this story about kings and queens. And the other person's like, oh, well, we should have people to interact as these roles. And so while they're describing this, the rest of the cast is lying on their back on the stage. And it's important to note at this point that every cast member in that show is white except for Cedric. And so the characters on the platform say, well, we'll need a king. The actor playing the king stands. We'll need a queen. We'll need a body bartender. We'll need a hero. We'll need a lovely ingenue. And slowly as time goes on, all of the actors start standing up to play their roles. And it's left with all but Cedric lying on his back. When the young actor on the upper platform says, and then we need someone to play the extra characters like the servants and the lesser known characters and the messengers. And I lose it. I am in hysterics at this point. And I know 3/4 of the cast, and I know 3/4 of the audience, I think, or at least the 3/4 of the audience knows the cast. There's about 12 people in the audience and 12 people in the cast. But I'm the only one laughing at this point because it's an awkward moment to laugh if you don't know Cedric and know me, because most people don't have my dad's sense of humor. So I'm not the only one laughing because Cedric is lying on his back and his belly is bouncing. And I'm watching it bounce as he is doing everything he can to contain his laughter until finally he stands up. Now that energy, that silly energy is bubbling all throughout the play until finally one moment happens when another actor does something that he'd never done before on stage, and it's hysterical. And we all laugh, and he knows it's hysterical, and he almost breaks. And his actor on the stage almost breaks, and the other actor on the stage almost breaks. So we start laughing harder because we can see that they're almost going to break. So they start trying to contain themselves even more. And it's a perfect, if you've seen Carol Burnett's show or Saturday Night Live, it becomes this perfect moment when eventually one of the actors, I've never seen this on stage before, one of the 3 actors on stage at that moment throws his hands up in defeat, turns around and drops on the floor in hysterics. And the whole audience breaks, the whole cast breaks. And for a brief moment, we all shared a moment together that you can only have in theater and that you can only have in live stage. That in it together, in the room, that human connection that we so desperately need, and we're going to have it together. And that's why theater is vital, music is vital, meetings are vital, getting together is vital, because we have a memory that only we 24 people will ever remember, but it is one of the greatest theatrical moments that I had been in, and it was not scripted. We are in it together. We are in this together. And someday I cannot wait to be at the Brooklyn Inn or Marie's Crisis Cafe or Kettle of Fish or Montero's, maybe even the White Horse Tavern, sharing a glass with you after finishing our stories together with you. But until that time, it was absolutely wonderful being together with you today. So thank you very much for indulging our madness. For those of you who have the time and do have any questions, we're more than happy to take some questions. And we certainly are in no rush to go, but cheers. Thank you so much for coming. And to us, get lit with us.
Cheers.
Slancha.
Invisible glass shields you.
Yeah.
Literary pub.
Winter
I'm gonna
pubs.
just pull from my bottle to have more so that I'll have more to toast with. There you go.
I do have one question because Derek, you and I talked a couple of times about a couple of different options you had, and like each option had its own unique story to you. So I'd be curious if you'd want to elaborate a little bit on your thought processes.
On which one?
We were talking, it was Audra Lorde, Hansberry, and Hemingway.
You know, Hemingway, I didn't get to read enough, and I was going to search for his poems. I felt like I didn't get to read him enough in high school, though I got a lot of other classics. And then me and a friend got into an argument because he didn't even like F. Scott Fitzgerald, which I'm a fan. And so I wanted to do Hemingway because with the whole documentary coming out by, what's his name that does all the documentaries?
Ken Burns.
Ken Burns. I was like, I've really been wanting to read more Hemingway on my own. So I just wanted to do it. My mom's a huge Hemingway fan. My dad was more the storyteller. He got that from his family. My mom was more the literary person. And so she's a huge Hemingway fan. So I almost went with Hemingway. Then Audra Lorde, I see her stuff on the subway. I hear about her here and there. So I was like, I want to read more of her stuff. So each person I was going to pick, I had an interest in maybe learning about more of their stuff. And then Hansberry, like I said, is a Chicagoan. And when I started reading up on her, when she worked at the Freedom, she didn't come there to work as a writer. She came there as a receptionist and something else. And she was like, I do like to write and I can. And they had her doing like a jack of all trades. So I found that really interesting. I was like, let's stick with Hansberry, because I didn't even know she did poetry. Then I was like, why the hell not? Why wouldn't she do poetry? So that's when I looked into, and then I found Lynch Song. And then that had a good backstory. So that's how I kind of picked it.
Okay. Nice. Marissa, what is your advice to save time from having to keep going up to refill your drink?
Do as I do and just keep the bottle by your side at all times. This was fuller when I started, but I'm really happy about it. And I think it was a good decision. And, cheers to you all. I was enjoying the poetry more and more with each one that went by and each sip of my whiskey.
So a question that did come up in regards to when we would be starting the in-person tours again. And unfortunately, that's still an open-ended answer right now, as there are a lot of sort of things in play. And I think that the vaccine rollout will certainly be part of it. But there's also a lot of question of what's sort of going on with the different bars and who have stayed open, who still has their liquor licenses. And there's just a lot of questions on that side. So I can foresee us having to adapt our tours when we get to that point. But I still don't want us to sort of add to the mix, because we're seeing a lot of upswings yet. And as much as I'm eager and in a rush to get there, I want to make sure that we're doing it the right way and we're just not rushing it for economics or rhetoric in that sense. But as you can see here, you can follow us on social media if you want to learn more, at Lid Pub Crawl for the 3 major triumvirates of social medias. And you can become a Patreon supporter, or go to literarypubcrawl.com if you're not on our mailing list, and you can sign up there, as well as you can go to our YouTube channel. And this will eventually be up there in the next day or two, as well as you can see all of our past virtual tours that we've done as well. So that is another way to kind of stay in touch with us. If you are on our mailing list, I can promise you, you're not going to get inundated much, because it takes a lot of time to put together an email, and I just don't have that time. Which definitely makes that easier for there. But other questions or thoughts or comments?
Meredith, what's your favorite Shel Silverstein besides the ones that you read? Miranda, not Meredith. Jesus.
Yeah,
How much whiskey have you
who
had
are
by
you
now? I
talking
don't
to?
know.
Have the two of you met? You've only toured together for 10 years.
You're like the first person
that's
I ever
still
toured with. This is definitely a whiskey thing. But no, you said you didn't like The Giving Tree. Which is your favorite Shel Silverstein poetry book?
I think Where the Sidewalk Ends just really got it. What's interesting about it, especially for Shel Silverstein, is that, like, if you actually look at a lot of children's books, once you start looking, especially with poetry and things like that, like when I was trying to look at books, the other person I was really thinking about was Edward Gorey, who's actually one of my childhood favorite writers. I decided not as much because his, even more than Shel Silverstein, requires the pictures with the poetry. Like, it's sort of almost more connected in some ways. But like, they are dark. Like, Edward Gorey, Roald Dahl, they believe in darkness and like children and violence in a way that, like, I love. I mean, A is for Amy, who fell down the stairs. B is for Basil, assaulted by bears. C is for Clara, a wasted away. That is probably the first poem I'd ever memorized. I think I was 8, 9, something like that. The first children's book I forgot actually was pre being born. I was given a I see Z is for Zilda, who drank too much gin. I actually dressed up as her for Halloween one year. It's great. The first children's book I ever got was a Edward Gorey pop-up book. And so, like, but the thing with Shel Silverstein is when you look at his stuff, is compared to those, his is so sweet. it's this weird thing where like this guy who's like mostly outside of his poetry for children is famous for like living in the Playboy mansion and sleeping with 1,000 women and like regularly going to, you know, nudist colonies and writing about them for Playboy and yet writing Hug of War. Like there's something about his stuff that's just so sweet and so amazing. And so I just really love a lot of the things he has in there.
So somebody did ask, Laura Bartlett asked, who is a friend of ours and a friend of the company's for a while. In fact, her husband, he and I went to school together, Chris Sias, and we were part of the original theater company that this used to fund. And in our village tour, we would sometimes go to a bar called Chumley's, which is sadly, I think, now closed. I don't know what's going on with it anymore, but they were going to auction everything off and whatnot. But that was on, oh yeah, it's, I think that's it. But it was at 86 Bedford Street. And so there used to be a legend that the term to 86, it comes from 86 Bedford Street back in the days when it was a speakeasy. And when they knew the cops were raiding, they'd call ahead to give some advance notice, and the regulars would all 86 it, which would go out the front door so that they could get kind of busted there. But it's partially apocryphal. But yeah, Laura, it's well, because the pandemic hit everything hard in New York City. And I have a feeling that was sort of the final straw. And I think they were having a little bit of struggles. And if to give you a sad sense of where the village has gone, the village fought the reopening of Chumley's when it kind of collapsed, where it used to be that you moved to the village because of Chumley's. So as far as do any of us write poetry, I write bad poetry. And I have a huge collection of just terrible poems. Really just poorly thought out, lousy rhyme and meter, but with a lot of angst. Because, you know, especially from my early college years, I have a huge collection of 20-something white boy college angst, which I think if you want to know suffering, it was being a young white college boy in the 90s. I think outside of that demographic, you just don't know angst. Thanks, Chris. Good to see you. Chris and I were roommates. He was my first roommate in New York City. He's using the pseudonym of his wife's name for, I think, lots of really good reasons that I shouldn't get into right now because I don't know where all the court cases are. But Chris was the reason why I moved to New York. Really good to see you, Chris. Thank you for taking the time, man. He's the reason why I still periodically play Baldur's Gate. And I'll tell you something, if you're a Baldur's Gate fan, like the new Max, like it's a whole new thing when the save times and the load times are instantaneous. So like now you can just walk and save, because like the risk of dying was like, oh, it's going to take forever to reload back to that scene. And now, no, it's like instantaneous.
Eric, I have no idea what that means. What does any of that mean? Can you translate for us?
I don't know what that means either.
Oh,
So
well,
before you would get like loading, pausing, loading, but now you can just hit save and you can keep moving in the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Instead of being like waiting, almost there. Have you know, like when they put you on hold, like, please wait for the survey. Please wait for the survey. Please wait for the survey. Please wait. You're like, oh, damn, this survey, I'm out. But instead now,
I mean, let me back up and say, I have no idea what Baldur's Gate, like what even
Baldur's Gate. Well, I can respect that not everyone can be fully enriched in culture. It's just a lot with living with our lives and whatnot. But if you were to take Dungeons and Dragons and turn it into the ultimate version of a PC game with a great plot and storyline and mediocre graphics, you would be having the game called Baldur's Gate. It is set in the Forgotten Realms, which is a spinoff of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules. I believe that they were using Series 10 rules, focusing pretty heavily on the 10-sided dice. And
as you explain this, Eric, this is what I'm doing. Yeah,
I can't believe that people are dropping off. Participant numbers are dropping fast. So, Devin, when you played Baldur's Gate, what kind of character were you?
Eric, everything you just said about Baldur's Gate literally went like this. Me. Just, I lost video games around SimCity 2, and then just nothing.
Gotcha.
Now I'm just having memories of a terrible Dungeons and Dragons campaign where I tried to play an elven sorceress with only 3 hit points, and I was supposed to do magic, but I kept swinging a sword because I was very confused about the rules. Anyway, I want to go play this game. And hi, Rob's adorable child.
I do actually have a great Dungeons and Dragons game, alcohol game story, which is that at that point 9-year-old nephew really wanted to play D&D with myself, my husband, and my mother. And so we were like, we do not know how to play this very well, but okay, let's try it. And so he got us all into teams, he got everything set up, and he said, okay, we're in the town, what's going to happen next? And we said, well, is there a bar? And so he went to the tavern, and then he went, okay, so now we can go on a quest. And we're like, well, are there drinks? And so it ended up with this 8-year-old trying to deal with a bunch of adults saying, and he's like, okay, well, I only know of 2 drinks. I know of martini and mimosas. For some reason, those were the 2 in his head. And so he had us go into teams of one team was the mimosa team and one team was the martini team. And then we seemed to have drunk too much and had a bar fight with ourselves to the point where I rolled a 20 and got to drink a whole bottle of vodka and therefore drank my mother under the table and won the game. But this poor 8-year-old is like, I guess we'll go on the quest next week. And I felt so bad for him. But it was a great D&D game.
When I was in high school, we would play semi-regular games on Saturday nights at a friend's of my house whose apparently uncle, it was in his 40s when we were in high school, and he would DM for us. And the big claim to fame is that he had once played Dungeons and Dragons with Gary Gygax. And so when we were in nerd mode, we were like, whoa, because Gary Gygax, as I'm sure you all know, is almost single-handedly the creator of the game Dungeons and Dragons. He came up with the first concept of the rules with a few other people, but he's really the person behind it. And if you really want to nerd on this, you should Gygax, Gygax. Gary, as in Gary, Indiana, and Gygax, Gygax. And if you read the book Ready Player One, you'll get lots of schooling on some Dungeons and Dragons as well. Gary Gygax, that's not a name.
I'm going to add this, being that we're on a poetry tour, but with the whole fantasy thing. When you read a lot of fantasy books, I find that there's a lot of times where they have prophecies and it goes well into poetry. A lot of the prophecies are poetry in the books. And I always found like people like, oh, I wouldn't get into that. I was like, I bet you if you watch some of the game go down, you would instantly get hooked because you see that connection with fantasy, poetry, and prose, and then storytelling. And I always felt that the better fantasy things, even in Dungeons and Dragons, they always had a part where there was usually a riddle or a prophecy that was in poetry.
The second you need to predict something, it's got to be in verse. I agree.
It's got to be in verse.
Tolkien says it's the rules.
What is a box?
I always grew up on the Tolkien songs.
A golden treasure is hid.
Mm-hmm.
Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long forgotten gold.
No,
Miranda, what a beautiful voice.
Is that from the animated Hobbit?
No, actually, that is from 12-year-old Miranda deciding to write a song to the poetry.
Oh,
Nice.
Eric, I know that animated movie, The Hobbit. That warped my mind. I don't know what it did to my mind exactly. The animation in that is amazing. If anybody has not seen the animated Hobbit from 1970 LSD, whenever it came out, that is a fantastic film.
It is.
Yeah, I think it's still the best representation of the Hobbit. Dusting off my daggers. Oh gosh.
Has anyone seen the Leonard Nimoy?
Oh yes.
Bilbo Baggins. Yeah. If
No.
you can, YouTube it. If you haven't seen it, YouTube it. It's there.
Bilbo.
It'll always be there.
Bilbo Baggins, king of the wild frontier.
I like that this is turning into pub crawl karaoke. This is great.
Yeah, right. I'm still impressed at how many people are on here. Well, look, I could talk about this for hours and amuse myself to death, but I'm sure other people have places to go. The mold of their lives is in their hands to break. Nice. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time. I mean, we really enjoy doing these. It means probably more to us than so many other aspects of our pandemic lives right now. But I certainly appreciate it because this has been a pet project of mine for a long time. It means a lot to me, and the fact that we could keep it going virtually and actually have people sit here and listen to us for this length of time, I find very flattering. So check us out on our website. We're doing better at upgrading it. If you have been enjoying my t-shirt or some of the variations, that is merchandise that can be sold. We'll be, and also if we do have links here, if you are able to send some tips, that is certainly always appreciated. But we do know this is a pandemic, and probably like me, many people are struggling to get that income in right now. But it's going to change. We are going to get through this. The end is there. We can see it on the horizon, just over the misty mountains. lies what we need. So. Thanks, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you next month. Next month, I think we're doing a Times Square tour. So if you're around for that, we hope we can. Brooklyn? Oh, it's Brooklyn next month. Brooklyn and then Brooklyn. There we go. All right.
So you didn't wander around Brooklyn and showed off. Brooklyn's
Take care,
amazing.
gang. Queens, who's in the house? All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.